Okay. Let's start off here on page 230. Back at this caption again about the ancient fertility witchcraft ritual still practiced in February. Now it says here in the month of February, candy makers unload tons of heart-shaped boxes full of candy. You know, all in the means to make it look so great. You know, the candy is nice and sweet and tasty, and, you know, it wins over people's hearts and minds to bring them into, keep them into the deception that they're in. And then, of course, millions of innocent school children get indoctrinated to exchange Valentine's cards with each other. So it's teaching them at a very young age to do what's wrong, you know, to fall into God worship. Now, florists, of course, they love it because, man, they can just sell all these flowers and roses and everything else. And so everybody who actually gets wrapped up in this, celebrates this ritual, they consider to have love in their hearts when they do that. Of course, they don't know what true love is because love is only keeping Yahweh's laws. But in their minds, they really think that they're doing something. Because remember, their minds are darkened, okay? They don't know that they're actually worshiping Satan. If they knew that they were worshiping Satan, they certainly wouldn't be doing it. From Compton's Pictured Encyclopedia, St. Valentine's Day. It says, for centuries, February 14th has been observed as St. Valentine's Day. Traditionally, February 14th is a day for lovers. In medieval times, now, it's a time for lovers, right? You remember what it says here in Yisrayl? Oh, let's see. In Yisrayl 5, verse 30 to 31. If I can get that on the screen. Okay. Get that out of the way. It says, an appalling and horrible thing is committed in the land. Now, the land, of course, is the world itself, right? So it has to do with the whole world. And it says the prophets prophesy falsely by the lie. Of course, that's Baal, Lord, and God, and so forth. And it says that they prophesy by their own authority, okay? And the people just love, okay? The people just love. And so Yahweh says, but what will you do in the end? You know, what will you actually do in the end time? So it shows that this is the end times. It's not just a time of, you know, of something that the prophets went through during their time period and so forth. But it was actually something, like he says, what will you do in the end? I don't know why that comes up there. That's aggravating. But he says, by their own authority. And the people, my people just love. But what would they do in the end? So the priests and the prophets, they're the ones that have bear rule by their own authority, and they end up deceiving the people and turning them the wrong way. And so the people just think all they have to do is just love, you know? And that's what Christianity teaches. Well, all they got to do is just love. And when you love, you keep all of those old commandments, and everything is fulfilled, right? But Yahweh says, well, what are you going to do in the end? You know, in the end time, showing that these things would be exposed, and of course they would be exposed through Yahweh's house. Now, I want you to notice here on page 231, the top. Traditionally, February 14th is a day for lovers. In medieval times, young people in England, Scotland, and France used to assemble on St. Valentine's Eve, and they drew names by chance from an urn. You know what an urn is? An urn is a vase where you keep dead ashes when people are cremated, okay? So basically it's keeping the ashes of a dead person in the body, in there. And so they pull their names from that. And each person then became the Valentine. And that is the special friend of the one whose name that he drew. And it's still customary on this date to exchange gifts, and many of them heart-shaped as an expression of affection, and friends and families and flowers and all this kind of garbage, you know. They make it look great. So here they end up, you know, pulling something out of somebody's, an urn that is used for death, And that in itself, Satan is so clever, I mean, she uses all of these things, and these people have no idea what they're even doing, because they don't even realize that they're getting suckered into this kind of stuff. But they are. And they fall right into it because they have no earthly idea. And that's the amazing thing, is that Satan has the whole world deceived in only the house of Yahweh. As he says, you only have I worked with. Just a very small group of people. Now, another fairy tale about this holiday is the fact that this custom of Valentine's Day has something to do with a martyred Catholic saint by the name of Valentine. Actually, there's more than one, but although in truth, a man of that same name, okay, he may have been martyred, but why does the world seem to want to worship a dead man? Remember now, the Catholic Church is it's all based upon death. It's all based upon death. That's all they do, is everything that they worship is the sun god and dead people. However, now, the truth about the origins of this fertility ritual go beyond a mere man. Compton's Pictured Encyclopedia, volume 13, page 12, then tells us that the Roman festival Lupercalia might have something to do with Valentine's Day, it said. It says of the several saints named Valentine, the most important were a Roman priest and a bishop, okay? And he says that their feast day is also the day set aside for lovers, seems to be merely a coincidence. The Roman festival Lupercalia, which occurred on February 14th or February 15th, when it originally was, may be related to the modern celebration. So they give you a hint there. They try and tell you, but then at the same time, they try and brush it off, and that's what they always do. They always bring some information, but then they will never admit it. And so they'll kind of like brush it off to the side and make you think, hopefully you'll forget about it and won't question it. Well, centuries before the birth of Yeshua Messiah, the pagan Romans were celebrating the evening of February 14th and the day of February 15th as an idolatrous and sensuous festival in honor of Lupus. Now, lupus is a Latin word for wolf. The wolf is a symbol for valor, as a dictionary of symbols by J.E. Sirleck on page 375 says. So Valentine was a common Roman name which Roman parents often gave to their children in honor of this famous man who was first called Valent. So Valentine in antiquity and Lupercalis, the hunter, is what it was referring to. Now the Romans identified Lupercus with Faunus, okay, fauna, or faun, or pan, okay, different titles, but it's all the same god. And the Greeks called this nature god Pan. Now the Dictionary of Mythology, Folklore, and Symbols, okay, tells us about Faunus, and it says, Faun is in Roman mythology the grandson of Saturn and the son of Picus, brother and husband of Faun, and all this kind of garbage. Turn over to the next page is what we want to look at, though, page 232. Because what I want you to notice here is it talks about Pan. It says a Greek woodland spirit, okay, in the left-hand column there. God of the flocks, the hills, the pastures, and wildlife, okay? And it was a deity of weather and of wind, and also these things affected the crops and the herbs and so forth. So Satan was so clever, and this is what you got to realize with God worship, okay? Remember, in the very beginning, it tells you it's subtle. Satan is very subtle, and that's exactly what she did, for the fact that if you notice, all of these things that the people looked at, because they're everyday things of life itself that gives you life, and things that you experience every day, she tried to show that the gods and the goddesses were the ones who had power over these things. And so therefore, you had to worship these gods and these goddesses, or otherwise, you would be cursed. Now, Pan was the chief god of the Saturns, and Satyrs, you see that a lot in Isaiah and the prophets' writings and stuff. And also notice was the patron of fishermen, hunters, shepherds, and created mirages and other pitfalls for travelers. So you see here about the fishermen and the hunters. You know, the scripture tells you that. Remember, Yahweh says, I'm going to send out fishermen and I'm going to send out hunters, right, to go and to do my work. But, of course, Satan counterfeits everything that Yahweh does. And he's said to have caused groundless fear, hence the word, you have the word panic. You know, it comes from the god Pan, okay? Now, he was a rural and woodland deity, patron of the herding and huntings and so forth, and husbandry. And he was worshipped in groves where Yahweh said, remember, the groves, don't grow those things, don't have them around my altars and so forth. But he was worshipped in groves where the oracles, his oracles, or the writings, the teachings and so forth, was heard. And it says, Faunus means to favor, and he also called Innis, which was the fertilizer, and Lupicus, one who wards off wolves, okay? One who wards off wolves. Now, I want you to think about that word wolf, because the origin of this word, the word wolf, the origin history for the word wolf in dictionary.com, wolves are a symbol of lust. And that's an ancient symbol that was used for lust. And it's a Roman slang. Let me show you this. Get it small enough here. Wolf is wolves are a symbol of lust. Ancient times, Roman. It's a Roman slang. Lupa, which where you get the lupercalis and so forth, is whore, meaning a she-wolf. Okay, so a she-wolf is a whore. Well, how was Rome founded? You remember Romulus and Remus? They were twins, and they were suckled on the she-wolf. Okay, because they were left out there. Someone was trying to kill everybody in the family and everything, and supposedly they left them out in the woods, and the she-wolf came along and took care of them and so forth. Okay. So Romulus and Remus, they grew up because the shepherd and so forth came by and took care of them and stuff. And then later on, they decided to build a city. Well, they were going to build a city, and one of them wanted to worship, or one of them wanted to build it on top of Aventine Hill, another one wanted to build it on top of another hill, I forget what it was. But so they got into an argument, okay? And it ended up where Romulus killed his brother, Remus, okay? And he named the city after himself, Rome. It became known as Rome. Now, the great whore, remember, sits on the 7 hills of Rome, right? So that's another tie to the god worship, this whore, because remember, the she-wolf means the whore, okay? It means a whore. So the she-wolf, or whore, fed the twins her milk, which is, of course, her teachings, right? And then they turned to violence and to rebellion, which we see all through the Roman Empire and all the other empires that Daniel spoke about. So you see here, continue on this definition for wolf, it means the equation of wolf and prostitute, a sexually voracious female. And by the Elizabethan times, wolves had become primarily a symbolic of male lust. Okay, so you can see it's male or female, either one, because you remember even Satan herself is known as male. She's worshipped as male and female, right, in different parts of the earth. It doesn't matter. She's got people convinced of that. And that's why you see society the way it is, to where people become, transvestites and stuff. But the specific use of wolf for a sexually aggressive male was first recorded in 1847. But you remember the wolf whistle? When men would whistle at the women and so forth, right? Okay? Keep that in mind, the wolf whistle, because here on page 232 it says, let me back up where I can see this thing better. Platuk relates that, he was a historian, I believe. He relates that a story of someone was passing through this island. They heard a mighty, let's go to the next one. Where was that at? Let's be on another. Must be on another page somewhere. Okay. Let's go on here with this other one. Reading from the World Book Encyclopedia here. The World Book Encyclopedia. Fawn. You see the picture there? It shows the picture of the god. Okay. He's got the horns. Well, sometimes he's pictured with horns or pointed ears like a goat. And then he's got the body and the torso of a man and the arms of a man. But his body, the rest of his lower body, is of a goat. Okay? And this is, of course, where they get their pictures from of Satan and so forth, as the devil with the pitchfork and all that kind of stuff. But fawn was both in Greek and Roman mythology. And they had pointed ears, horns, and the tail, and their legs were sometimes had, hair and feet and so forth. But they ended up, and the last time they played the flute and stuff, where you see them dancing around in the woods and stuff. So they always tried to make these things, the gods and the goddess look very inviting and very harmless to people, so that they would get sucked into it. But actually, Pan was an Akkadian god of light here, because we see here talking about Baal here in the dictionary mythology and folklore and symbols. When you look up the word Baal, and sometimes you'll see it Baal, or Baal, just B-A-L, or B-A-A-L, or sometimes Bel, B-E-L, or Belu, B-E-L-U. It doesn't matter. It's all the same as Baal. The same God's being spoken about. But it says, any of the numerous local deities among the ancient Semitic people, typifying the productive forces of nature and worship with organistic rites, okay? So you can see that this is what they did. They ended up grabbing a hold to the minds of the people, bringing them to the point to where you see, it's the same things you see going on today. In fact, there was one of these articles somewhere where you read where it's almost like people going out to a nightclub, It's the same kind of thing as you see going on today. Well, these deities, Baal, it simply meant Lord, okay? He was a Lord. But he was also a sun deity. And he also dealt with the wind and so forth. Well, the Phoenicians, as the Phoenicians, you see the underlined section there, it says the Phoenicians' sun deity, he was a male productive power, okay? So it always had something to do with productive power, okay, fertility rites and so forth. And so they were known as the lunar gods in Syria, but also the Lord of the heavens and the creator, and they controlled fertility, rain, and thunder, all of these things that people relied upon for their daily life to keep them alive. So remember, the scripture tells you, it says that Yahweh is our life, right? In Deuteronomy, Yahweh is our life. He is the life giver. He is the one who gives these things. But yet, what they do is they take that focus off of Yahweh, away from Yahweh, because remember, the people don't know Yahweh. They got completely away. The name of Yahweh was removed from their mouths, and they went after these gods and these goddesses and stuff. So they just went totally after all of these things, and they ended up messing up really, really bad. Now, if you remember this word, this wolf, like we talked about the wolf whistle and stuff, the Apostle Shaul, he had to deal with the same kind of thing here. You remember in Acts 20, verses 29 to 30, he says, "For I know this, that after my departing, grievous wolves will enter in among you, not sparing the flock. And also among your own selves men will arise, speaking perverse things to draw away disciples after themselves." Okay? So notice, he considers these people as wolves, coming after the people and destroying the flock, because that's exactly what a wolf will do, is it will go after the sheep and end up, wiping them all out. So this was not anything that wasn't being dealt with in the apostles' times. The same things that you read here that, sometimes people think, oh, this is old ancient history, and it's all ancient stuff that occurred way back in the Greeks and Romans, way back in the Babylonian time and all this. Remember, it all came out of Egypt, okay? Because Egypt was the first world ruling empire, okay? And the Israelites took all of this stuff out with it. And they ended up spreading. They were actually the ones who ended up spreading this out. Even though Yahweh says, don't do this. Don't inquire how the people worship the gods. Israel did exactly that. They went and they did it. And they're the very ones who was given the law. Remember when Yeshua said, you were given the law, Moshe, and yet you don't even keep it, right? The Israelites were the ones who took this law, pushed it aside, and actually went after this God worship and was the ones who were responsible for spreading it out to the whole world because of what they did. Now, Baal is the sun god. He was a symbol of the male reproductive power, okay? And the earth was considered to be the female reproductive power as Belith, who was the wife of Baal, okay? But Baal mentioned here, and it's mentioned a lot in the scriptures, as a title for the Nimrod system, that really pushed it, and known as the hunter. In the King James Version, Genesis 10, verse 9 says, he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it said that even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord, okay? But of course, Nimrod wasn't a man. Nimrod was a system. And as a system, it was set up to where, yes, they did. They went and they hunted. They hunted people down, with the book burnings and the killings and so forth, with the crusades and all of that. But they hunted down people to force them into their religion. And, it's not surprising that they would go and they would force people into it, because you got to remember, okay, they're caught up in the God worship. They worship the gods. And this is what the gods do. Even right now, there's countless numbers of demons who are enticed and forced into doing things that maybe they wouldn't do if they weren't forced into doing it, and following the crowd and so forth. But there's no repentance for the demons. They can't repent. However, if they do it, they sin is sin, So that's why Yahweh says don't follow the crowd. So if they follow the crowd, they follow the crowd. If they want to choose to remain righteous, they could. So we see here information about Nimrod from the two Babylons. And let's see, in Scriptures refers to it in Yeketskiah under the name of Tammuz, where it says, talking about the weeping of Tammuz, where he sees, remember Yeketskiah saw all the women weeping for Tammuz, okay? And also in the name of Bacchus, which means the lamented one. Now, to the ordinary reader, the name of Bacchus suggests nothing more than just simple revelry, and drunkenness, going out and hooping and hollering and getting into all sorts of trouble and committing all sorts of sin and so forth. But there's more to that, because this was also considered. Now, you got to remember, when you worship the gods, this worship of the gods, just like the worship of Yahweh, purifies ourselves, right? We purify ourselves through the worship of Yahweh. This is what the gods taught too, that this was a form of purification. So when they got into all these rites and did all of these rituals and fell into all of the sin and began to do all of these things, they considered this as part of their purification of their sin, okay? Showing the fact that they didn't know what sin was to begin with, or otherwise they wouldn't have done it, but they were blinded. Remember that. They were blinded. Everybody is blinded, except for the house of Yahweh. Now, this lamented one, he exhibited and adored as a little child in his mother's arms, and that seems to point to the fact to have been as being the husband of Semiramis, whose name Ninus, by which he is commonly known in classical history, literally signified the sun, okay? So you see Semiramis, and you see the little baby, the mother and child, the Madonna and so forth, and then the son. Now, and Semiramis and, all of that situation, all of that was part of the Nimrod system, remember, okay? The Nimrod system. This is how, just like, it's no difference. Today you have the Catholic Church and you see the worship of Mary, okay? Mary worship. Who is the mother? She's the Madonna. Okay, and then you have the little baby Jesus and so forth. Okay, around Christmas time, it's the same thing. It's just an exact copy of what took place here, back here in Babylon and so forth, when they had Semiramis and the son that was worshipped as the mother and the son. Now, keep in mind here that what Yahweh says, because Nimrod's not a man. It's a system, but it's a system that taught all the forms of sexual immorality that has brought this earth to the condition that it's in now, as Isaiah 24, 1 through 6 tells us, okay? But remember, in Leviticus 18, verse 6, it says, none of you shall approach to anyone who is near of kin to have sexual relations. I am Yahweh, Yahweh says. And in the nakedness of your father, which is the nakedness of your mother, you shall not uncover, because she is your mother. Okay? But yet, you see here that the people were worshiping the mother and the son became the husband. You see how confused this is and how screwed up it is? But they were believing in incest, that incest was holy. So is it any wonder why people today in the Catholic Church think that sodomy is holy? You know, that's the holiness that they look upon, is breaking the laws of Yahweh. The Apostle Shaul had to deal with that abomination as well. You remember in 1 Corinthians 5, verse 1, he says, it is actually reported that there is sexual impurity among you. Okay, and such sexual impurity is not even mentioned among the Gentiles, that a man has his own father's wife. Well, who would that be? It's your mother. Having your mother. Okay? And so the same type of worship here, you know, the apostles were dealing with this kind of stuff even in their time. It wasn't something that had just done away, because, you know, when people look at these things, they consider it as history. And when you look at history, you know, sometimes they think, well, you know, history is just a certain part of something that took place over here and maybe over here, you know. But it doesn't deal with anything of the present time. You know, it's just things that took place that you can kind of like just push away in this certain area over here. Now, that just occurred over here, you know, in this century, and then it stopped, you know. Well, no, it hasn't. It's always gone on. And this is why God worship hasn't, why it says in Revelations 12:9 that Satan has deceived the whole world. You know, it's never stopped. It's continually going. And she continually grabs hold of the minds of the people and keeps them there. The Babylon. Now, on the bottom of the page here, 233, it says, now, understanding this in a spiritual sense, okay, about the Baal and so forth, it goes on and says, in the beginning of the word, the birds were first created, okay? And then after that creation came the race of the blessed immortal gods, okay? So the birds were created on the earth first, and then the immortal gods were created, okay? Now, remember, immortal means can't be touched by death, okay? And that's what the Masons believe, you know, that you have an immortal soul, right? And then, of course, Yahweh says the soul that sins, it will die in Yekishke 18:4. But even the word Mason, remember, means make. That's one of the meanings of the word make, which means they want to make yourself into a god. You know, don't make yourself into the image of Yahweh. Make yourself into the image of the gods. But it's interesting here because they talk about these birds and refer to it as the winged ones, or the lords of the mighty ones. Okay? But you think about what goes on in the world and what the mindset of the world, the way that the world is right now. And what's the vulgar symbol that they use when somebody gets hacked off at somebody? Is it not the bird? Huh? And you know what that symbol means, don't you? Okay? Now think of what we've been talking about here in this devil worship. And you see the reason why that's a normal reaction to tell a person off in that manner. Because that's the whole world is deceived to think that way. And it's instant reaction. You get mad at somebody and you slam them with God worship. Okay? And that's what the things that we're overcoming to get these filthy things out of our hearts and our minds. Now, this is the lords of the mighty ones that we're considered, okay? Then, let's see. There's a lot of fables that went on here on page 234 here. So much material here. If you want to read all this, you can read it in your spare time. I'll just hit it roughly on some of the things because it takes too much time otherwise. But you see here where it talks about the fables. Now, fables is something that people get caught up in. And remember, the scripture tells you don't listen to fables and so forth because you have the prophecies to listen to. The prophecies are real. You know, you don't have to stretch the truth. The truth is the truth. You don't have to add to or take away from it. It stands on its own, you know. And that's the way that Yahweh's word is. But fables, they, you know, even with Rome, they had the story of Romulus and Remus, okay? But there's also another one that somebody else came about and founded the city in another way, okay? So they can't even agree on that, you know? So they just, whichever one wins the most popular vote, that's the one that they stick with, you know? But these fables refer to those who were supposed to have trodden in the steps of this Nimrod system, and they were the lords of the mighty ones. And that character was symbolized through the wings that they had, okay? The wings allowed them to have, like, free movement and spirits and so forth, that they could move around and they could move quickly and fast and so forth. Now, these mighty ones and these gods, they derived their origin from none other than the winged boy. You remember Cupid, what you see around Valentine's Day? He's got the little wings and a little fat chubby boy floating around, you know, no clothes on, and he's bouncing these arrows off of everybody, right? Shooting them. Again, those arrows going into the heart. That's a symbol right there, okay, of the wickedness that goes on during that time. And then you have the quiver-bearing Semiramis, it says, being a fit companion for the mighty hunter before the Lord, you know, which was they considered as being Nimrod and so forth. But it also talks about the god of the chase, and the huntsman is referred to. And they say it identifies with the Egyptian god, with Nimrod. And of course, Nimrod's a system. He wasn't a man. It was a Nimrod system. But the Egyptian, it just shows right there and more proof that this came from Egypt itself. The name in Egypt was Conan. Now, if you look at the bottom of the page, it says, who could be the god of the hidden counsels, the concealer of secrets? But Satan, the god of the mysteries, whose name was used at Rome, signified the hidden one. The father of Cona, or Conus, as he was called, he was known as the hidden god, okay? The hidden god. Now, of course, it was hidden in the whole religion. This is why I remember it was called a mystery religion. It was a secret, so people couldn't understand these things. They didn't, because face it, if you went out on the street right now and you told somebody, hey, you want to learn about Satan worship? Yeah, you know, here's how to worship Satan, right? And tell them, you think that they look at you like you're nuts, right? But that's what they're being taught when they go to these churches. But they don't understand that. But they're secretly being taught and indoctrinated into worshiping Satan. They don't understand what they're doing. If they did, and they're in their right mind, they wouldn't do it. But they're not in their right mind, okay? Always, always remember that. They're not in their right mind. Only someone who practices righteousness is in their right mind, okay? Because that's what right means, is righteousness, okay? So you have to keep the laws of Yahweh. You have to be faithful to Yahweh. Otherwise, you're worshiping Satan, plain and simple. There ain't no other way about it, okay? Your uncles and your aunts and all your kinfolks and all this kind of crap, they're Satan worshipers, okay? Point blank. They don't worship Yahweh. Either you worship Yahweh or you worship Satan. There is no in-between, okay? There's no such thing as thinking, well, they're not that bad. They really ain't too evil, But what went on in the very beginning is there's mixture of righteousness and evil. It's evil. Because with Yahweh, you don't see any mixture of righteousness and righteousness, right? It's righteousness, pure, holy righteousness. Anything other than that is Satan worship. And that's why we're working so hard to get these things out of our lives when we're becoming made into Yahweh's image, to get them out. Because we're the only ones, the house of Yahweh has a high priest, Yeshua Messiah, and we're the only ones who have that ability to be able to get these sins off of us. At the top of the page here on page 235, it says, talking about the God of mysteries or the hidden counsels. He says, can there be no doubt that Khans, which is the Egyptian god, known as the huntsman, also agreed with the same Roman divinity as the supposed producer of the horse, who's so likely to get the credit of producing the horse as the great huntsman of Babel. So they use horses. Now, you can see here where it talks about the centaur, who was a half man and half horse figure, okay? And the centaur was an evil sucker. There was nothing righteous about the centaur, okay, at all. The centaur was, again, when you get back to Egypt, you see with the fact where on the page here, you got that mixture of that animal that is there. Here you see the picture, it's got a horse body and a man's head, okay? And, of course, he's got the bow and the arrow. That should ring a bell in your head, right? Doesn't Revelation talk about the bow, right? The Pope is the one who has the power to pull the strings on the bow, okay? Conquer and to conquer, to go out and to conquer. Well, the centaur here had a horse body, okay, which is powerful and stuff, and then he had a man's torso and a man's head and the arms and stuff. Now, yeah. Well, call you later. Okay. In Yisrayl, I want you to look at something here, okay? Because I want you to remember all that we're talking about. In this section of the book, we're talking about we're exposing, and hopefully you should, there's a lot of stuff that's being covered here because this whole chapter here has to deal with sex worship and all this kind of stuff, the depravity of man. But hopefully it's sinking in and you're understanding the reason why we're going over this, to be able to see and understand why the world is the way it is now, okay, and why their thoughts are the way they are. Well, this centaur now, this was a powerful beast, but in Yisrayl, the prophet Yisrayl said in 23, verse 19 and 20, and this is Yahweh talking about Israel, says, "Yet she multiplied her whoredoms, calling to remembrance the days of her youth, in which she played the harlot in the land of Egypt." Remember, she came out of Egypt, okay? And for which, in her youth, okay? And for which she lusted after her lovers, whose flesh is like the flesh of donkeys, and whose issue is like the issue of horses. Okay? He's referring to this centaur here. Okay? And the Egyptians actually use the hieroglyphic symbol of a horse to represent a lustful person. Okay? Now the Egyptians, in their languages and in their writings and so forth, they use those different symbols and stuff. And they would actually use the horse to represent a lustful person. Now, the centaurs, these creatures, okay, like I said, they were not very friendly, okay. They were always pictured as being, very violent and would go out and would, rape the women and so forth and stuff like this. So when people get caught up into this lifestyle, this is why they're doing it, because these things have been built into the genes and passed on. Remember, we've seen this, okay? The only reason any of us here tonight and watching and so forth, that anyone is in the house of Yahweh, the only reason why we are able to say that we worship Yahweh is because Yahweh allowed that gene to be passed on, that righteous gene, so that would give us a calling and give us the understanding and the comprehension of his word and have the desire. But we have to feed that desire, right? You have to feed that desire to want to know what righteousness is and to continue to remain as righteous. But the rest of the world isn't. They have all of these things in there. And when you see in these different religions about these half animals and half man, like the Egyptians always had and stuff, bestiality, that's all this stuff is. These things are even made in laboratories, okay? They're made in laboratories. They make them in laboratories. They make embryos and stuff, and they would like to inject them into women's wombs and have them actually grow. And the Catholic Church has already said, they've already made a ruling on it, saying that if that ever comes to pass, you can't destroy it. It's allowed to be able to live, because it's just going to give them more weird sensations to do whatever the hell they want to do with it, But that's the sick mind that these people have gotten to. This is the sickness of this world. There's nothing that we should ever desire to even want to go back into. We're working so hard to come out of it. Why in the world would we want to go back to it? Doesn't make any sense. Well, this centaur was an archer. He was a mighty hunter, okay? And remember, it goes back to the time, the Nimrod system, a mighty, like the King James says, Nimrod was a mighty hunter against Yahweh, okay? Well, this was starting up way back then. This is the lifestyle that Cain decided to have and to pass it on to future generations. And then it passed on from there. And then, of course, Cush, stirred things up and ended up, making Babylon and all of these things and taking off with it and spreading it worldwide. Well, the hunter, this Nimrod system, is said to have pursued wolves in the Apennine Mountains of Italy and acquired the title of Lupercus, or wolf hunter, hunter of the valor. Okay? And valor, of course, valens means to be strong and powerful and mighty. So what this doesn't say, though, of course, is that, and you can research it and find out, the symbolic meaning of the word hunter, according to the Dictionary of Symbols here on page 236, it says the word hunter means, that is, desire itself. Okay, desire itself. Similarly, okay, another name, Zagreus, another name for Dionysus, means the great hunter and stands for the insatiable incontinence of desire. In other words, nothing's going to stop you from doing whatever enters into your mind with your filthy mind, okay? That's the desire. That's what a hunter means, okay? That's what the hunters and the fishermen that the god Pan, or Fawn, was pushing out there on this world, okay? I mean, look, Satan has the whole world to see because she's got a lot of workers, okay? She's got a tremendous amount of workers. And if it wasn't for that promise that Yahweh gave, and Yeshua said, that the gates of hell will not prevail, you can see why we would be sucked up right into it. And we wouldn't be able to stand up against them because we have no power except with Yahweh. And, of course, Yahweh is the ultimate power. And that's the challenge because you can't see Yahweh. You have to believe without seeing, right? But you see his influence. You know that he is real and he is there. And the challenge comes to stay firm into the end because what we have, is the promise that we're going to bring all of this back to Yahweh's way and do away with all of this God worship. No more gods will ever exist again. No, there'll be no more God worship, All sickness and sorrow and all of these things will be removed from us. We'll have new bodies, man. New bodies. That these bodies right now are just so screwed up with all of the diseases, things that we have. It's just totally destroyed. And even our minds, we can't even think straight sometimes because of the fact that you have aches and pains and all this kind of stuff that bothers us. Can you imagine waking up with a new body, You never, ever will ever have another ache. Nothing. Your whole body will just be bursting alive with energy. Every microbe in your body, every atom, every quark, get down as small as you want, Everything will be working exactly the way that Yahweh created it. to its fullest potential, you imagine how great you're going to feel, how your mind will be so sharp and you'll be so alert and so ready to do everything. You know, you'll be fully prepared to go and to do the work that Yahweh wants us to do. Okay, so this Nimrod system was not only strong and powerful and mighty in the political sense, but it was also powerful and mighty in a sexual sense because of the worship services of these pagan peoples, that it was just simply centered on sexual activity to ensure fertility. That was the whole job. You know, they figured, hey, you know, if they would get into these things and do these things, and you had the temple prostitutes, you know, and you know, usually when we think of a whore or whatever, but, you know, that's, and you have whore and whoremonger and so forth. But a prostitute really is male or female, you know, according to in the ancient times. It didn't matter whether you were male or female. You could still be a prostitute. And this is exactly what they had. This is what the temples were set up for, you know, so you could go in and do all of these things. And this was to ensure that everything would work out great, you know. This is the way that Satan had it. You know, is that, you know, she worked on the minds of the people to think that, like today, you know, people go to church and they feel good. You know, they feel good when they go to church. You know, well, they basically have a thing about feelings, you know, except they don't really know what greatness is. We do, don't we? We know what greatness means. We know what greatness is. We experience greatness in Yahweh's house. You'll never experience greatness in the church. You'll only have the feel-good feeling, you know. Well, this Baal Lord God, okay, of the ancients, he was born at the winter solstice in agreement with the mythology of the birth initiation and death fertility cycle. Okay, you remember that means that you know, throughout the seasons, the guy would be born, the guy would grow up, everything would be fertile and all this kind of stuff, and then the god would die, and everything would go into wintertime, everything would die off and so forth, right? So, but you see, the gods used that because they knew that this was something that people could relate to. And they always used something like that so that the people could relate to it and understand it, because their whole life was based upon it. So it was this life cycle, this fertility life cycle that you see going on. Let's see. In the year 2100 before the Common Era, the winter solstice occurred on January 6th. And Semiramis, the mother goddess, right, and the wife, ordered the Nimrod system birthday to be on January 6th. Now, the Eastern Orthodox churches still commemorate January 6th now, but they call it Epiphany, okay? The Epiphany, which is known as Gift Day. But the Catholics celebrate the Christmas season on December 25th is the day of Christmas, okay? But you have the days, the 12 days of Christmas in between December 25th to January 6th, okay? The time of the Epiphany is when the revealing of the God and so forth, okay? So you have, that's when the old saying goes about the 12 days of Christmas, you know, your true love gave to you more and more debt, right? So let's get into this purification here. It says the time of the winter solstice on January 6th, okay, was the exact time the pagans celebrated the birth of the sun. It was first known as in pagan antiquity as the Epiphany. Okay, it's still celebrated today on January 6th with the same rituals of witchcraft, to the same fertility gods and goddesses. The dictionary of mythology and folklore and symbols tells us about the Epiphany. It says the ancient Greek festival celebrating the appearance of a deity. Okay, that's what Epiphany is, the appearance of a deity. Okay, now that's what Jesus did. Okay, Jesus was God, and God became man. And that is what the Epiphany is, of God coming down, becoming made flesh. It says the Christian festival was borrowed from the European pagans. Yeah, so they admit it's pagan, the winter solstice. Okay. Now, in antiquity, it was a custom for the mother who had just given birth to be unclean for sexual purposes for a specified number of days. Now, we know the law of Yahweh talks about that, the 40 days for male child, 80 days for female child, right? Okay, so Semiramis, the mother, again, Satan knew these laws, and she mimicked them. She did these things so that she could entice the people and to get them thinking about these things. So, if someone, you can see how this worked now. Now, if someone came to you, and this is why the gods always did this kind of stuff, because if a believer came talking to someone and talked about the time of purification, well, the pagan mind could relate to it because Satan imitated it. Yahweh's law says you shall wait so many days for the purification of the mother. Well, in God worship, they did the same thing. They had the time of the purification. And so they would relate to these things and think like, well, yeah, I believe that too, And so you can see if people have something that is close or even can relate somewhat to what righteousness is, they're content with what they have. And they don't try and change because they can't. Their minds are wrapped up into what they're in, and they can't change their mind. The only way the mind can change is if Yahweh opens that mind. And Yahweh's only opened the mind to a very select people in these last days, okay? And those whom he is calling out and continue to call out in various parts of the world, he's given them the opportunity to be able to see these things and to understand these things. But not everyone is given that opportunity. And that's what we've got to always remember, how blessed we are. Now, the 40th day after January 6th is February the 15th. So after the Epiphany, after the appearance of the God, okay, after the God became flesh, 40 days later, the appearance of the God came the time of Valentine's Day, okay? So you can see how slick Satan was in using that to do this, because she used the birth, because it's something that people can relate to and can understand these things, and she twisted these things. So, February 15th, which began on the evening of February 14th, the day which was called the Limmuwdyah was celebrated. The Dictionary of Mythology and Folklore and Symbols here talks about Limmuwdyah. Limmuwdyah, a very ancient Italian deity, it was god of fertility worship, that was identified with Faunus or Fawn or Pan, as we saw earlier. Okay, Limmuwdyah, which is February 15th, is in honor of Leviticus. Okay, and the Luperci, which were the priest of Leviticus, they would dress around. They would remember what they did is they had the strips of goat skin, and they would run through the crowds and they would whip the women with it, right? And that was supposed to ensure that they would become fertile and stuff. But I'm sure there was other many things that they had done that can't be spoken about. But Webster's Deluxe Unabridged Dictionary tells you about Limmuwdyah, and it says Limmuwdyah. It's an ancient Roman festival with fertility rites held on February 15th in honor of Leviticus, a pastoral god. Again, remember what Yahweh says? I am the shepherd, right? And he says, you are the sheep of the pasture, right? You are the sheep that's out in the pasture, out in the world. Satan takes that and says that the god, this Limmuwdyah, is a pastoral god, okay? The god of the pastures, the one who produced all the fruit. Now again, Yahweh said, don't you know that I am the one? Remember in Hosea, he says, I am the one who gave you these things. I gave you the wine. I gave you the grain. I gave you all of these things. Yet you turn around and you say it was Baal that gave you these things, And so you can see how Yahweh says he pleads with all flesh as he brings these things out to the people through the mouth of his prophets, but yet they still refuse to do them. Now, according to the Dictionary of Mythology, Folklore, and Symbols,
Faunus was called Ennius, which means the fertilizer. And Lupercus, one who wards off wolves. Faunus, the Faunus main festival was the Lupercalia, and the priests were the Luperci. Now, it says, what is the significance of these facts? Well, the proper surname of Lupercus was Februus. And the Dictionary of Mythology, Folklore, and Symbols also tells us that Februus was properly a surname of Lupercus. Lustrations was performed in honor of the Lupercalia on February 15th. Now remember, February 15th, and people say, well, I ain't got nothing to do with Valentine's Day. But remember, the day begins on the evening of the 14th and goes into the 15th, and that's how it all connected. Because if you go by Yahweh's way of counting, you see how it connects properly. As this says, lustrations was performed in honor of the Lupercalia on February 15th. The Dictionary of Mythology and Folklore and Symbols tells us that februation is the Roman rite of ceremonial purification. So they actually believed that this was going to purify them, okay? Remember, they used to sacrifice the animals, and they'd run around with cups and punch holes in the sides of the animals and let it bleed into the cup and drink the blood, the nice warm blood, and think that this was something that they were doing in honor of the gods and were purifying, just like they would take a pig and so forth, and go out into the oceans and stuff and think that this was a form of purification and stuff. Now you also had the lustral bath, which was a method of purification as well. Again, nothing more than imitation, the counterfeit of Yahweh, right? Yahweh says you must be baptized. You must be immersed, right? Water purifies. But the gods had the same thing. They use. You go into a Catholic church, and you have the little canister, the little bowls, whatever you want to call them, basins of the holy water, and you dip your fingers in the holy water and you make the sign of the cross, and then you go on and you genuflect on one knee and go in and light your little candles to Mary and Joseph and all the rest of the gang that's out there, and it's all in counterfeit of the things that Yahweh has given into mankind, that he says, do these things, and these things will keep your minds on me. But don't seek after the gods. Don't seek after the gods. And that's what people do, and that's where they fall into trouble. One more thing here. In Webster's dictionary, it talks about the lustral. It says lustral means the purification, a purification sacrifice. It was connected with the ceremonial purification, and lustring refers to purify by means of certain ceremonies, okay? And making pure, ceremonial cleansing. Well, the only way that you can be cleansed is to keep Yahweh's laws. That's what cleanses a person. But again, they walk around in their little piousness, and they move their little incense thing, and they have the little smoke come up and all these things, and they mumble these things in Latin, which nobody can understand. They do all these things in secret and stuff. And they hide the fact that they're worshiping the hidden God. And that's why they wrapped up into these mystery religions, these hidden religions, that people do not understand what they're doing. And they don't even question it. The old saying with Catholics is, I was born a Catholic, I'll die a Catholic. Right? You ever hear that? I was born a Catholic, I'll die a Catholic. They're headstrong with it because they're never taught to question what they believe in. What do you believe in? Well, they really don't have a belief. They're just conditioned to a way of life. And that's what God worships. That's the entire world is sucked into at this time. And that's why they've gotten to the point to where they are now with the confusion of their minds, because they don't know the way of truth. They don't know the way of Yahweh. And that's why we have to work so hard is to get ourselves right so that we can go out and open it. Because, when Yahweh opens the minds of the people, when you think about the peaceful solution, it's so simple. It's just so simple. How anybody, when you read it, you think it's like, wow, it's so simple, it's so easy, right? It really is. It's perfect. It's perfect. But you got to have a mind to accept it, to practice it, right? Because unless you can practice it, you'll never see peace. But when Yahweh gets to the point, when he gets to the point to where he begins to open the minds of the people to where they begin to see these things, then you're going to really see the fruit of your labors go forth. And then you can see the minds of the people, and then really begin to see the people begin to flow to Yahweh's house.